We'll make a start. People can continue filtering through. In case you missed the beginning, hello, once again, I'm Mark, and welcome to our webinar. Before we dive into the presentation, we'll just cover off a couple of general housekeeping rules. If you have a question during the webinar, please enter it. There's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, so you can just type it in there. We'll get to the questions at the end, but you're free to ask any questions throughout. In fact, we encourage you to put them through sooner rather than later. No need to wait until the end, and we'll get through as many as we can today. If we don't get to yours, just again, depending on time, a member of our team will touch base with you after the webinar. We are recording today's webinar as well, so we'll be sending the recording out later on today, I believe. So today we'll be discussing workplace stress, how to manage it, and how to use it to your advantage, both individually and in your teams. So there's quite a few people joining us here today, and given the high attendance, we're assuming that many of you are here because you already know how stress affects you and your team, and you're looking for practical strategies on how to manage its impacts and those pressures in a positive direction. So we're really glad that you've joined us here today. By the time you finish the webinar, you should walk away with some really useful tips and practical advice. So today we're joined by Dr. Natalie Flatt. So Dr. Flatt is a psychologist and co-founder of Connect Psych Services with over 20 years experience supporting mentally healthy, high-performing workplaces. She specializes in practical research-based strategies that build resilient teams and psychologically safe environments, and is a regular keynote speaker and advisor across the industry. We're really excited to partner with Dr. Flatt and Connect Psych Services to expand our EAP program and psychological safety services to our clients. A little bit about me, in case you haven't attended any of our webinars before. My name's Mark Stewart, and I'm one of the business development managers here at Citation Group. I work with businesses just like yours to help uncover any gaps that you may have around HR and safety processes and find solutions that streamline people management. Next slide, please. Thank you. If you haven't attended one of our webinars in the past, here's a little bit of information around the group itself. So we've been around for just over 30 years, working to help Australian and Kiwi businesses by providing complete workplace compliance solutions that help create better workplaces. So from outsourced HR solutions, safety management systems to ISO certification, Citation Group can support your business. If you'd like to learn more about us, I'd be more than happy to speak with you after today's webinar so we can get together and work out a bespoke solution. Today, we're featuring citation safety. So citation safety is a complete solution that helps businesses keep on top of their work health and safety obligations. Whether you're a small business or a large enterprise, every company needs a solid partner that supports and provides reassurance. One of the great things about citation safety is that we can provide tailored solutions to your business. So we've got like a 24/7 advisory line where you can access our workplace consultants, a library of resources. We've got a safety audit and a compliance training center. We've got a massive range of solutions to suit your needs. So we've got the agenda up on the screen now. There we go. And I'd like to first bring in Dr. Natalie Flatt as we discuss today's topic. So just as a reminder, any questions you've got throughout today's webinar, there's a Q&A box at your bottom of the screen, and you can type those in whenever you like. All right, so just to kick things off, Nat, great place to start. Obviously, we'll do a quick introduction, and a great place to start is to understand the stress spectrum. So effectively the difference between good stress, being eustress, and bad stress, which is referred to as distress.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mark. Look, it's we hear so much about stress, and I think that when we hear the word stress, like stress, when you hear the word stress, Mark, what does that actually mean to you? Like, is that a positive? Does that give you like a positive feeling or a positive emotion, or does that actually give you an emotion even that might even be connected to overwhelm and overload?
Yeah, more the second part. Yeah.
Yeah,
Usually. Yeah.
because it's stress really it exists on that spectrum. So as you said before, we've got one end we can have eustress, and this is the kind of stress that we really need. Like we need this for motivation, we need this for being able to keep us a sense that obviously it keeps us alive. And I'll get into that later, but it's more about that ability to be able to use that level of adrenaline to your advantage there. And that is where we can actually start to thrive, and we're actually pushing ourselves to certain levels. And so we've got that end on that spectrum. The other end of the spectrum really sits at the distress level. And so this is the kind of stress that a lot more people actually start to resonate with, because this is where it can wear you down emotionally and then also physically. And we see a lot of this stress related, again, around job control, and even some poor relationships that can start to become the result of this. We can look at our stress response here as well. So stress is all based on from a physiological component of our brain. So really focusing in that limbic system there is that when we can actually start to see an environment that will create the stress trigger within our bodies, that is what then can start to then switch on that fight or flight or freeze approach there. And we've actually evolved this over time. This was our real survival of the fittest component of our brain, especially the trillions of years ago, when we were really those cavemen, which actually allows us to stay alive. So that was really that survival of the fittest piece. Those stresses were very different when we were those cavemen back in our ancestors to what the stresses are now. So really, though, what we're aiming to do is stress is trying to get us out of life-threatening situations. But sometimes if we actually think about, when our stress is triggered and our response is actually triggered, are they actually life-threatening? I don't think so. But our brain can actually tell us that they are. And so that's where we can start to see a lot of that catastrophic thinking, and it can start to create us more so into that distress level. And where we actually can see the distress level, and this is where we can start to see a lot of increase in anxiety, and then also a lot of increase into the burnout section of that spectrum as well. So it's really important to remember that it does come on the spectrum, and also that the same event could actually be presented to an individual, or even the same individual at a different time, at a time point, and the reaction actually could be eustress or it could be distress. So it just again depends upon your, the context, and all your mindset, the duration, and whether we also then perceive as humans that we actually have the resources to cope during that situation.
Right. Perfect. So then just looking around more like the understanding of our own signs or cues of stress, obviously that's really important. I'm sure many of us kind of can identify some of those ourselves, but can you take us through what we need to be on the lookout for to be able to map our own stress spectrum?
Yeah. And I think everyone has that, it's like that's our stress signature, isn't it? It's, that we can look at ways that our body and our behaviors is actually telling us, it's giving us a signal that we're actually under pressure. So, that I like to break this down into the 5 components here. When we actually have that stress response going on, there's a lot of adrenaline and cortisol and other hormones that can actually be running around our body. So it's going to be creating different levels of physiology depending upon that individual. But the common ones that we can sometimes see, that most of the time see, is those headaches. We can start to believe that we're feeling quite fatigued. We can start to get our sleep becomes a little bit more patchy. Because we've got that adrenaline running through, and it may not be as easy to get to sleep there. We can start to feel our muscles tense because we might be walking through the day with a little bit more, trepidation about what's to come. And we can start to have digestive problems, which either can be, the IBS or the constipation kind of area, because our digestion can actually start to get out of whack based on how we, again, might be clenching our muscles, but then also is depending upon, again, if you've got the fight or flight response. IBS can also then be related to needing to get out of a situation faster, and so we really actually need to become lighter. So there are actual reasons as to why the body is actually reacting physically. And then we can look at emotional. When our body is really out of whack, we can start to show this through emotions. Now, we can start to see individuals' levels of anxiety, their catastrophic thinking, getting out of the way. This is going to be the most finite. This is the worst thing that can possibly happen. And they will start to verbalize that or feel that or think that. We can then start to look at incredible sadness because of I just can't cope. I just don't know what I can do, how I can actually manage this. We see, the feelings of overwhelm can be very, very common. I just don't know how to cope. This is just all too much. So we can start to see some of those statements coming through. But even, just when things are too much and you've got so many other stresses that could even still be bombarding you, we can start to see those mood swings occur and the irritability. Again, our body is going up and down from a physiological perspective. So sometimes that can be really hard to regulate. And one thing I do want to mention here as well is that when we do have our system going, our fight and flight system, this actually starts to affect our prefrontal cortex. So this is where our self-regulation occurs, where our organization occurs, where our problem solving occurs. So when we don't have as much blood flow going there because our body's saying, hey, we're in a threatening environment, this can actually really be difficult. It can be really difficult to regulate our emotions. Then again, connected to that is that cognition. So we can start to see that our cognition is starting to not be as sharp. We may not be able to make decisions as easy. We may have, what we say, that brain fog. There might be that level of indecisiveness. So our decision-making process is just a little bit slower. And that's also then, again, because of our racing thoughts, we can't seem to land on something that might be rational. And memory lapses can be really, really common of what individuals see within their stress signature. Behaviorally, we can start to see those changes occur. So whether that's through our eating patterns, whether that's through our sleeping patterns, individuals either can feel like they don't want to eat at all, or they could have that emotional connection to eating. We also see that when our stress response is on, that our olfactory system actually is really heightened as well. And because it's our cortisol actually is also pumping around with the adrenaline, we can actually start to sniff out higher carb and higher burning level food. So we can see people say that when I'm feeling stressed, I go for the chocolate bar, or I go for something sweet. Again, there's like that connection there. So it's not, there is an actual reason, and so it's not uncommon for us to see that people stress eat. But, we do see a lot, of withdrawal. People are feeling, again, overwhelmed, so they will just pull back because it's easier to avoid. And move away from the stress that or that stressful situation that it's causing, because it's not a nice feeling to feel really stressed. However, the more we then avoid that situation, we can't learn from it. So therefore, the anxiety of going into that situation when we need to also then starts to increase. Again, what we see is that with individuals with a high level of stress, we can start to see, I suppose, escapism. And escapism through behaviour can be more that leaning towards a substance abuse, where it's the high level of alcohol intake, or other substances to be able to, I suppose, numb those signs of stress, because that's one way that we can recover. Again, it's a level of avoidance, but we more class that as escapism. We can start to see that procrastination come in. So really connected to that indecisiveness, and we just don't know where to start, and it's all a bit overwhelming. So we're just going to do something else. So we'll just work on something else. So we'll keep on avoiding that big place that's actually causing us all these emotions, all these physiological feelings. And then also some nervous habits, like we can start to see people might be creating certain rituals just to be able to mitigate that stress. And again, using those nervous habits to really starting to formulate a behavior within them that is indicative that they are in control. So they're just trying to control that situation. So we can start to see certain things in order, certain ways that we can then start to move through the day to try and control that situation. Sometimes that can be out of our control. And then lastly, socially. So, we can see that individuals with a high level of stress, again, that fight or flight response, where I'm talking a lot about flight response here, but a fight response is, again, those individuals that can actually hold a high conflict with others. So they're happy to stay within that response and fight it out. Individuals can have reduced communication, feelings of isolation because it's just easier to pull back. And then it starts to really affect other areas and activities within your life. And it can really then start to strain relationships, because sometimes it can be really difficult to express that you feel stressed and why you feel stressed. And, that can really start to put a big impact on even asking for help.
Of course. And that's like a lot of this is based on the individual, obviously. But can you talk us through the different types of stress that can actually affect the team environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is where we start to see things can really unravel from a team level. And I think I broke it down into 3 areas here where we actually can have a look at the productive stress. And so the productive stress, it can really enhance our performance as a team, and really start to increase that level of engagement. And this is where we want to really highlight that not all stress is bad.
Of course.
The short, sharp bursts of pressure, what that actually does is it can actually sharpen our focus. So we are able to really hone in on what we need to work on, because we know that there's a beginning and then there's also an end. And so this actually can really help with driving some good team outcomes. And this is now connected again to innovation. It's connected to energy. It's connected again to that short goal achievement, and it can even then strengthen that connection through a shared challenge, especially if you've got reflection in that.
Perfect.
When we look at then the tolerable stress, this is probably more so again that eustress piece, I would say, more so. And so when we are in those short, sharp bursts, and we're able to then reflect, it can allow the teams to then build that level of resilience and then adaptability when stress does occur and how it then occurs. Because under each industry, Mark, as you know, you're going to have the more high-pressured industries that are going to need to show that level of adaptability more so than other industries there. And the way we can then manage that tolerable stress is that you have that level of support, and you have that time to reflect as a team, but then also the importance of that time to recover. And this is great stress here, this eustress, because it allows a team to then strengthen their level of connection, because they have an opportunity to talk about the project, or whatever that short-term piece of work was. They've got that shared challenge, but they're then able to go, okay, what can we learn from this? And that's what allows them to put themselves at that one step ahead when that project or that stress, short-term stress occurs again. So really important there. That really starts to increase both psychological safety, and then also a stronger connection and problem-solving ability within the teams.
Great. Okay. Is there a way to manage the good stress without it kind of turning into the harmful kind? Is it like a balance, or how's that kind of tackled?
Yeah, I think Now, where have we gone now? I'm trying to, we got, sorry, I just clicked on the wrong one. I think that's where that, again, that toxic stress there, when it becomes unresolved, and is really constant, if there's no time to recover, that pressure will start to build, and overwhelm people's capacity. And this is where it can actually start to link to the burnout, again, the trauma, the disengagement within teams, but then also poorer, I suppose, clinical outcomes, but workplace design outcomes, as a whole. This constant pressure, that's going to overwhelm the capacity, and that will actually start to lead to harm. And what we can then see is the higher levels of absenteeism, again, turnover, some presenteeism, or like that quiet cracking that we're starting to read a bit about, and really can start to put workplaces and teams at risk for psychological injury. So that is something that we don't want, that to occur, because it is all about balance, isn't it? That we've got, the positive stress needs to be managed, as you can see in the first two columns, with a level of support, with a level of reflection, and with enough time to recover. So that way, teams can, they can keep the benefits, like resilience and adaptability, without tipping into the damage sides of stress. Think of it like a marathon, Mark. We know that there's some amazing people out there that can run marathons back to back, but more often than not, if we were able to run a marathon, we're not going to go straight back into that without actually saying, okay, well, what worked for me? When did I, stop for water? How are my shoes and socks? And, what could I actually do better? We need that time to recover. We do need that time to recover from a physiological sense as well, in workplaces there.
Perfect. Okay. How can stress become like a risk factor in psychosocial hazards? Now, psychosocial is something that's popping up more and more in our line of work as well. So on the psychosocial side of things, how does it actually become like a risk factor?
Yeah. So, like, Mark, a team in a high stress environment at all times is at more risk, because the sustained stress will actually erode the very conditions that actually protect the psychological health at work. So, often the pressure to deliver outpaces the resources available. So we see this a lot, again, in sections of our healthcare industries, that you've got time, you've got staffing, but then there's also the role clarity, and then also the support. And a lot of the support can be from your colleagues, but then also from the leader support. And what this can start to create is a real ground, or a fertile ground, for hazards to then start to emerge. You want to break that down? I'll break that down for you, Mark, there.
Please, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've got, I've probably just taken a few, and these are the big ones that I feel that, really stick out for me, is that the cognitive overload and that decision, fatigue. And so when workload and deadlines are continually relentless, our mental bandwidth actually will start to shrink. As I was saying before, is that stress is really good for high pressure, like as in short, sharp bursts. It's supposed to get ourselves out of a threatening situation. That's what our limbic system was actually meant to do, with our ancestors, and still to this day. When you continually have this stress continually pumping around, your limbic system continually firing, it's not, it's going to start to erode other sections of your cognition and overall your body and your functioning. As a consequence, you will get shorter, like there's something's got to give. And more or not, it's going to be our mental capacity there. So people will then, you could start to see people start to not make the decisions that are, as great decisions. They can start to struggle with certain processes. you can then start to even notice those early signs of burnout. So whether or not that's in the team or within themselves. And when we look about burnout, it's not just about the emotional exhaustion. It can start to be a level of cynicism towards the role. It can start to feel that you are quite starting to depersonalize from the role as well, and completely disconnect there. So there's an other element of burnout that's goes just beyond the mental exhaustion. But over time, this will start to increase the risk of errors that a workplace sees. You can then start to see a higher level of conflict occur, potentially unsafe shortcuts, and again, all of which are psychosocial hazards within themselves. We can then look at the role strain and then also the conflict. So, when you're in these areas, which is a high pressure setting, the boundaries of the roles start to blur. So people might just start to pick up extra tasks just to get things done. And that can then start to lead to some competing priorities, unclear expectations, and certain poor role clarity there. This can then start to erode the team as a whole. It can start to raise anxiety and then also frustration, and then that's going to be eroding a level of engagement through your team and even the smaller teams there. The social safety, so erosion of that, under stress, we can start to see that our communication, it can start to become really compressed. So maybe we'll have our check-ins that could be really rushed. The feedback can sound a lot sharper, and that can actually be taken as in different connotations there on what the feedback might be, and there may be a lot less space for empathy, and then also that social connection. So what that breakdown does, it starts to undermine and break down that psychological safety within teams. So it makes it harder for people to start to speak up about their workload, their role clarity, if there has been any mistakes or if they're witnessing any mistakes, and then also anyone with their level of emotional needs and well-being needs at that time. We can look at, again, even looking at increased exposure to other hazards. So, stress tends to I suppose, magnify some existing risks. So we can start to see level of bullying or incivility spike when we can start to see that irritability or the tempers can start to be really short, that there's unrealistic demands put on already overworked chronically overworked individuals. And then the autonomy does start to then drop when the only priority in a workplace is just get it done, just get it done. So all these are going to start to compound, again, burnout, depression, and we can even then start to see some physical health symptoms again start to occur when we again having our stress on all the time. That level of adrenaline, cortisol, and other hormones in there, it really starts to break down our immunity. So more likely to pick up bugs, get sick, and just generally feel run down. But we're looking at this again, say, when we're working potentially with vulnerable clients and cohorts, when we're working in high-risk physical areas, where job demand or job control is actually low anyway, this can actually then start to lead to some, probably more fatalistic accidents too. And then we've got that, that I suppose that recovery deficit. So in that prolonged high stress environment, again, teams, the breaks can get skipped. People are working later, and that they stay, more mentally switched on at home. So without that recovery, the nervous system it'll stay in that heightened stress state. And so then again, that makes it harder to regulate the emotions, to stay engaged, or to even think creatively and innovatively, which is what we want all workplaces to be able to do. And again, it can start to then create some long-term risks there. I haven't even got into the retainment area on that, but I think everyone probably gets the gist there about how stress really connects with psychosocial hazards in the workplace.
course. There's a whole lot to unpack there, and I'm sure we could sit here for a lot longer than
Yep.
the allocated time. But it seems like it's more than just a general well-being issue, right? It's a lot of it comes down to kind of like work design.
Yep, exactly. It shifts the responsibility for managing chronic high pressure environments back onto the employer. And so this is where it's really important when we look at our work design, and the psychosocial hazard management. It is a workplace issue. It's not. We don't want to be relying on workers' comp claims, and after people have already burnt out. There's so much that we can already do as a work design, and the way work is actually set up, provided, and again, having that level of autonomy within, set within the work design is then going to be able to help mitigate these stressful environments there. So that really means investing in preventative measures like adjusting workloads, and looking at the KPIs and actually saying, are these realistic? Because every project might be different. So having a set standard timeline, and then those KPIs met, it really needs to again be adjusted at the right times, for the right projects there. Looking at real mental health training for leaders, and I like to use the word training, Mark, I suppose a bit loosely, is that, this is, I would like to say, more mental health knowledge, and understanding, leaders' own self, and leaders having that level of self-awareness, and then being able to recognize that within themselves is the first step that they need to take before then recognizing that within their team. So we look at, again, statistics are really showing the highest level of burnout actually is in middle management. So they're getting pressure from the top, and then they're also getting pressure from below. So they feel really quite sandwiched in there. They need to actually look after themselves. So being able to understand and notice the signs and recognize what you can do, and then being able to then recognize that within your teams is of utmost importance. Having access to a good employee assistance program is really important as that part of that step with leader awareness. So we can, again, a leader can identify that there is some signs of a struggle within a team or within a certain individual, being able to ask the right questions, and how they are. That's pretty much where again, we try and say you don't have to do much more than that. Like, we look at a lot of leaders that are concerned that they're becoming those accidental counselors, and leaders are, I say this often, those cultural architects in a workplace, but they don't need to also then be the employee assistance program. And that is what's so important about actually having a really strong relationship with your EAP, and knowing the steps that you can take with that, to guide that team member, or even yourself, for that level of support. But then having that, that employee being that program, EAP, being able to provide the right level of feedback that's all anonymized to make and strengthen your team as a whole. So it really comes down to having a good relationship with your EAP, and not actually using this as a tick of the box. They can be a really great support piece in that controlling of hazards there. Looking again at rotations or job redesign for variety, and then also for recovery. So again, with those workplaces or industries with more the low job control, just again asking the employees and the teams, how we can chop and change some things, where realistic, that is going to give you that level of variety there. And then overall, that psychological safety, we want to be able to build that psychological safety within our workplaces, so people can feel that they can speak up early, and then they can also speak up without actually getting any reprimand for doing that. And being able for everyone, as we know that if we can create, I suppose, workplaces that allow for that ability that people can talk to bring their ideas to the table, knowing that their ideas are going to be considered and talked about, this is what actually creates that level of innovation and drives workplaces forward. So psychological safety is a real crux in mitigating many psychosocial hazards, but also very important on the other end to create that level of positivity. And when we can see a psychological safe workplace, our attainment of those staff is actually also greater.
Of course, it'll make sense. So stress, if we kind of go back to the beginning, when you asked, is it more of a positive or a negative thing? It can be both, but like in the right context and quantity, it can enhance performance. How can we turn our own stress into basically like a superpower to make it this good thing that we were talking about?
Yeah. So I think that it's all about thinking differently, isn't it, Mark? It's hopefully already people have gone, oh, I haven't thought about that. Again, when we even look at our stress continuum, we want to be able to develop a stress enhancing mindset. So there's so much research out there. I like a researcher by the name of Alia Crum. So she's a psychologist. And what they found is that individuals who view stress as an opportunity for growth experience fewer negative health effects. And they also perform much better under pressure. So, for example, the studies show that adopting this mindset can actually increase positive effect, our levels of cognitive flexibility, and even we can look at from that physiological response that those anabolic hormones can actually support growth and recovery during those stressful situations. So effectively, your thoughts about stress really matter. So this really does influence our biology, our behavior, and then ultimately our outcomes there. We also then want to be working differently. So sustainable success can really come from a balance with effort and then recovery, not just working harder. So recovery really plays such a crucial role in managing that stress effectively. And this looks at, I suppose according to the research that the recovery focused programs for stress management, what we're actually finding is that the periods of intentional rest allow depleted resources to be restored, and then also fatigue to be reduced. I always like to look at it as when you've got a big puzzle, your 1,000-piece puzzle, and you're looking for that one piece, and you're so focused on looking for that one piece. And as soon as you walk away and you take a break and you can come back, and that one piece sometimes just is like looking you back in the face there, and you're like, that's what I need. I like to look at that as our brain. Sometimes that there's that focused ability, and then there's that diffused ability. The brain actually needs that time to recover and then to reset there. So really important that we look at taking it seriously, that restorative practice there. And that can be really different, to different people. But we can never underestimate the power of sleep. This is particularly vital, right? So adequate sleep hours and integrating, those activities within your routine, again, around that sleep. That's what's going to be improving cognitive functioning and mood, and then while reducing the body's stress response. So rest is just not the opposite of productivity, which a lot of people think. It's actually really part of it. We can look at, got a lot of information around the importance of sleep, and just even looking at if we can even get to sleep before 10 p.m. With some good sleep hygiene tactics. That is then going to that 10 to 12 bracket, is really where a lot of our hormones start to decrease, and then our melatonin starts to increase. So we're actually getting better sleep if we can go to sleep before 10 p.m. It adds not only an extra hour, but it really helps with a lot of recovery. So a lot of information about that, but I won't go into that now. The power of sleep. And thirdly, I think it's to live differently. How do you spend your time outside of work? It really matters. Self-care is effectively that intentional recovery. Do you know what you need to do to calm your nervous system, or recharge your mental energy or clarity. So these are two different needs that require different activities. So, for example, scrolling through your phone might help you zone out, but they're not going to then help you reset. So you can do both. A walk outside for 10 minutes of silence might be a lot more restorative. Play around with this. It doesn't have to be something that you need to dedicate hours to a day. The research actually shows that it is, again, those short, sharp bursts of recovery as those restorative practices can be enough in conjunction with that good sleep.
Great. Well, I mean, on that note, to all our attendees, feel free to use the chat feed to let us know how you guys help calm your own nervous system. I know I've got my own ways, but you're welcome to share down the bottom there. Just on to the next slide. How do we actually start making these changes? It's all good being able to identify these things and understand them, but how do we actually do something about it?
Yeah. So I think, look, as I was saying, even with the leaders, it's all about awareness, isn't it, Mark? We need to understand our own stress triggers. And this can be both at an individual level and then also at a team level. With a team, we have many different, it can be very dynamic at times. There's a lot of different personalities that come in and out of teams at certain times, dealing with different stakeholders. There are certain people, dare I say, that can press your buttons. But you may not know that. It could be quite unconscious. So we want to be able to bring that to the conscious there. And when we can actually understand what situations, potentially even what tasks or what environments are starting to consistently spike our stress levels, we can then start to be able to track the trends. And so we want to be doing this for a while, and I've written here, keeping a stress diary, again, paying attention to those physical symptoms when you're in a certain environment, identifying if you've got any of those negative or even that catastrophic thinking, that anxiety-provoking thinking to be occurring. And then evaluating, looking at your environment, and then looking at your daily routine, is there something in that area that is causing your stress to then spike? When you can actually do this, again, I would even say over, a 2-week period, it's going to then start to give you some data. And you can then even see, that where your stress actually lies throughout that fortnight, and you can then start to build out that on how that might look over a season or over a certain project. You can then start to see what situations are giving you those repeated pressure points. So what you can then do there is it's going to then separate the temporary pressure from the systemic problems. So individually, it's really helpful to do this, and because when we can actually understand if there's a stress response that might be going in again into our home environment, what can we do? For instance, I work with a lot of clients here, and I've got one client at the moment says, I hate it when my spouse walks in and I'm trying to get all the dinner ready, and I'm trying to get the kids bathed and everything, and they're walking in, with their head in the phone, and not actually asking me, if I need help. Probably it could be a common thing that I've just actually tapped into there. But, to then be able to go, right, having that conversation with your spouse to say, it's better for you to complete or whatever work you needed to do. But, before you enter, can we put the phone in the drawer? Okay. So when you're walking in, you're actually more present. And, one of the things that I might like is, how can I help? And instantly, because we actually then knew that, we could work on that. So that's like an antecedent. Okay, so we knew what we could then do. And so that was really important. And that's from an individual perspective. So really helpful there. But then from a team perspective, as we were talking before, we want to then be able to build out that work design. So if it's if it's a systemic problem, then leaders then will be able to work on fixing that work design. So this, knowing these these stress triggers. It's going to empower both leaders to be really proactive rather than reactive, especially about workload, the role clarity, recovery time. So rather than kind of sit in it and wait for things to occur, we're actually going to try and prevent things from occurring in the first place.
Of course. So it's not really just about being self-aware, right? It's about using that information that you gather at that point, and then basically designing, better work off the back of it.
100%. Yep.
Better way to work. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, I think that's on to the next slide. I'll leave this one with you, Nat.
Brilliant. Okay, so like looking at what we want to do to stay in that eustress spot, right? So we want to reframe that challenge. So reframing, our language plays a massive role in how we want to reframe a challenge. And I love using this kind of little trick here, thinking about the word should. When we actually say that word, oh, I should start that project, oh, I should get onto emails, oh, I should be writing that proposal, that word continually can start to create an outcome or probably more, an outcome that makes you feel very disempowered, makes you feel, like that you don't actually have that level of choice, and it can start to drain that level of energy and increase procrastination, et cetera, et cetera. If you can actually highlight in your diary, how many times do I actually use the word should, and start to change that to choose to or get to, what that will actually then create is a completely different output. So instead of saying I should start, that business case, I get to start that business case, or I choose to start that business case. And so that will then start to allow you to say, well, I've got the choice there, and that's in my control, and I have the autonomy. So it really can create that level of empowerment there. I like to also look at those words around interrogative versus declarative. So positive psychology is something I really love working with, but I'm also about growth mindset, especially in the eustress section. So when we can wake up in the morning and say, you know what, today's going to be a great day. I'm going to get on with everyone. I'm going to have that social connection. I'm going to get on with everything. I'm just going to do my work. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to feel really good. I'm going to smile all day. I'm going to make sure I say hi to everyone, whatever that is. And we feel like, we've really aced the day at the end of the day. We try to do that the next day and the next day and the next day. And albeit it sounds great in theory, what we're not doing is we're not really giving ourselves the tools to be able to on how to do it. So it will create a big ceiling effect very quickly. So if we change those wording into today's going to be a great day to how am I going to make today great? The word how, it can start to again trigger our prefrontal cortex to then be able to find a way on how are we going to do this. So it really enhances our problem solving skill set. So again, it's all good and well to be positive, but we actually need the skills and the toolkit to know how to be positive there. And then we have lastly like that affect labeling. And affect labeling, again, is around being able to really start to broaden and expand our like our emotional vocabulary. So instead of saying, this is I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, like using the core emotions, we want to start to say, look, what's under the anger, or it might be disappointment, it might be frustration. The more we can actually identify and name our emotion when we're in that stressed response, our brain goes, oh, I've got the emotion, I know what's going on now. And what that will end up doing is reducing that adrenal, that fight or flight system, and then open up some blood flow to that prefrontal cortex as well. So really important. Staying connected to your purpose. Eustress is really sustained when the task is more personally meaningful. So when we can connect this task to the bigger why, the values of the workplace, what are the goals? What am I actually contributing to right now? That's actually going to become a lot more energizing for people there. So that's really, a really important piece. never overestimate the healthy practices there. So we look again, there's lots of research around that nature connection, the food and mood, and again, what I mentioned before, that sleep hygiene. That 10 minutes outside really starts to increase our alpha waves in our brain. There's a lot of fractals out there in the clouds, in the leaves, and the infinite ocean lines. This actually is really meditative, but it actually recovers our brain. Food and mood, anyone more interested in a little bit more about those connections, more than happy for you to reach out for me after, along with sleep hygiene. Because Mark, I'm looking at the clock now and I reckon I can keep going. So I am mindful of that, don't worry. And lastly, it's again, just setting and protecting your boundaries, if you can switch off digitally, because this doesn't actually help you, you've got to make that concerted effort to do so. And then saying no to those non-essential commitments. Again, really hard for some individuals and certain personality styles. But again, starting small on saying no to even the smallest thing is going to give you that level of confidence. And it's all about protecting your level of energy. Okay, so we've got the our level of support, and basically really wanting to to stay in Eustress as a team and have leaders then really lead by example. And we know that when leaders are compassionate, and when leaders again show that level of vulnerability, but then also show what they do about it, creates it's got a driver. When we look at driver analysis there, individuals are more likely, or the employees are more likely to stay when they've got a compassionate leader. And the important thing is that when individuals disclose that they do have a mental health challenge, and that compassionate leader, or that leader responds with that level of compassion, again, a higher level of retainment. So it is, it's not only just from it's a good thing to do, but it also really has economical value, being able to create compassionate leaders within the workplace. And Mark, I think you'd agree with me here, we can overestimate that, because compassion and empathy, it's a bit of a soft skill, and we might actually have the hard skills as leaders, but we've just got to remember that this is something that needs a lot of practice. Emotional intelligence is something that we have to continually be open to, and again, is that level of practice. So, but as a good leader, this is I feel that emotional intelligence weighs heavier than your general intelligence. So being able to understand that. Looking at those stretch goals, being able to push your team with that little bit more, again, with that element of recovery and also reflection, is so important than just doing those big long strain goals and then again going kind of back to back there. If we can set the achievable goals and then breaking the larger tasks into milestones for that level of reflection, and also then that feedback, the next bit of that goal will probably be better, because we've already we already know what we should and shouldn't do during that time for that next section there. So there's those, if we can practice that as those stretch goals, you're going to get a better outcome within workplaces. And again, I keep saying it, recovery, reflection, and that feedback loop. After any of those stressful periods, we need to make that time as a team to recover, to celebrate, to recognise, even again, as that's that recognition is a psychosocial hazard, and then be able to say, right, we've got the feedback, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to change it. And that again is going to create that level of psychological safety. But leaders also need to enact on those feedbacks, not just say that they're going to do it, because then you're going to erode that level of trust within your teams.
Right, and the next slide.
Okay, so looking at how to stay how to stay in Eustress again as a team, like looking at fairness and recognition there. So just again, ensure those workload distribution, recognition, the career progressions are transparent. And so this will reduce any perceptions of unfairness. Again, one of those key psychosocial hazards. Looking at, proactive digital mental health support, again, who will work with organisations and the partners. So it allows for that flexibility and that autonomy, and that creates that employee-centric ability that people can access support anytime, anywhere. And so, again, depending upon if you've got, low job control, poor work design, just because the industry is like something like education, again, healthcare, transport, where they have to be out, they don't actually have the easier hybrid workplace models that, some other organisations have. You just got to make sure that your mental health support is appropriate for that industry, or even for your workplace there. From there, you will then get a better trust within the service, but then also an earlier uptake, an uptake of earlier intervention. So that's also very important. Yeah, and then we've got, so I think I've just covered all of those ones, Mark, in the right amount of time.
No worries. We'll go on to the next slide. We're nearly there. Obviously, we're cutting it pretty close. But just before we do, firstly, thank you, Nat, and we'll come back in just a second. Before we jump into all of the questions, and there have been quite a few coming through, so thank you guys for all the attendees that have asked any questions. Feel free to chuck a few more in and we'll get to what we can. I just wanted to take a brief moment just to share an offer with you guys as well. So if you're a bit uncertain around the well-being of your staff or your psychosocial exposure, we'd like to invite you to take part in our complimentary consultation call. So as today's presentation has highlighted, psychosocial safety in the workplace, it can be really complex and an under-discussed area of maintaining safety and compliance. So like from effectively managing psychosocial hazards to ensuring employees have access to a great employee assistance program, we're able to help in that regard, and we can basically help create a safer environment for your staff members. So this is just for you guys that have attended today's webinar. We're doing a complimentary consultation. It's just an opportunity for you to discuss, it's obligation free, discuss your business's compliance and understand if there are any glaring risks. So if you did want to take advantage of this opportunity, all you need to do is scan that QR code on the screen and you can fill in, there's like a landing page with a form. If you're on a mobile device, I think there should be a link in the chat box somewhere below potentially. If not, remember an email is going to come out a bit later on today, which I'm sure will have the form as well. We'll give you just a couple of seconds to fill in that form. And in the meantime, while you're doing that, once again, everybody, thank you for coming along. Like, we have genuinely got quite a few questions here. We've only got a couple of minutes to get through them. If we don't get to yours, we'd be more than happy to take this offline and have a chat with you after the webinar. So Nat, just to I guess, briefly run through a couple of them. Question one, how can I recognize when my staff are moving from eustress into distress before it becomes burnout?
Question. So I suppose the look of it, that shifts in behaviour and also then performance. So, for example, you might see one of your team members who's usually engaged and proactive might start to again become withdrawn, more quieter in meetings, or even start to miss some small details. You can also, you might then notice those changes in their energy and then also the tone. So again, when I was talking before, at the start, where people become more irritable, again, maybe starting to have an increased level of cynicism, even the visible exhaustion, or even, stating that they are exhausted, it can often be a signal for that level of distress. Looking at their work patterns. So if there's consistent overwork, skipping breaks, again, sending emails really late at night. I know that there's a one-offs here and there, but if it's, it's consecutive, this could indicate a little bit of a tipping point there. But then, so what you would even do is ask directly, and regular check-ins. Sometimes the simplest, how are you going at the moment? Like, I know there's a lot on how are you going with the load, and asking with that level of curiosity and compassion, that's going to then again, give you that best signal there.
Awesome. I can see it's hit 1 o'clock on my screen here, so I'm sure people do have other places to be now as well. There are more questions that we will answer following on from today's webinar. So thank you all, everybody, for coming along today. And Nat, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Always enjoy having you here. I think we're catching up later in the week as well, so appreciate
Yeah.
you coming along. As I mentioned at the start, we're going to be sending a follow-up email later on today. It will include a link to our recording. Feel free to share it around. So stay tuned for that email. As always, any questions, or if you'd like to schedule a chat with us, you can reach out to myself, to Nat, to whoever you like. You'll find us on, I believe there should be a link on the next page with some contact details. Thank you very much, Nat. Appreciate your time, and
Thanks,
everybody enjoy your
everyone.
Monday.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you.